Hello, and a warm welcome to the sixth episode of the Holcim Awards webinar series in collaboration with EcoGradia. My name is Dr. Priya Pawar, and I am the Program Manager of Holcim Awards at the Holcim Foundation for Sustainable Construction. The Foundation has been organizing the Holcim Awards since 2004 to support and empower change accelerators for sustainable construction. In the past 2 decades, the awards have gathered close to 30,000 entries from 130 countries across 5 geographical regions. The 2023 cycle received 500 valid entries, of which 20 winners were selected by a distinguished jury panel. This webinar has been planned to bring these winners up close and personal to the world. Today's webinar title is Architectural Acupuncture, Hyper-Local Designs for Communities. But before I begin the introduction for today, I have a disclaimer. If I pronounce the name of today's projects wrongly, please excuse me. Our guest will definitely do the honors. Today's guests are first Aya Helmi. She's the co-founder and managing director of Bina Foundation for Sustainable Development. Their project, Ezbet Eshaq Eco Classroom, has won the Holcim Awards 2023 Acknowledgement Prize for the Middle East and Africa region. Our second guest today is Richard Croker. He is the founder of Richard Croker Design, and their project, Muscowpetung Powwow Arbour, has won the Holcim Awards 2023 Acknowledgement Prize for North American region. Aya, Richard, will you please join me?
Thank you, Dr. Pawar.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Today's host of our webinar is Dr. Nirmal Keshnani. Nirmal is the host of EcoGradia podcast. He's a lead author and he's an educator of sustainable design. Nirmal, will you also please join us?
Hi, Priya. It's good to be back.
Hello, welcome. On behalf of our foundation, I welcome you all over here. Thank you for joining us. Aya, you are in Egypt where it's afternoon and it's probably very hot summer afternoon. Richard, you are in Canada and it's very early morning for you there. Nirmal, it's very late evening, I believe, in Singapore. So, being on these all 3 different time zones, I really, really appreciate your enthusiastic participation and I thank you all for being here. Before I leave, I have a note for the audience. Please type all of your questions in the comment box, and our host and our guest will do a great justice to us by taking as many of your questions as time permits today. So I will see you all. Nirmal, I leave the podcast today in your very good hands, and I will see you all towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. So, Aya, Richard, it's a great pleasure to meet you. Let me start with the quotes from the jury panels regarding your respective submissions. Aya, the jury for Middle East and Africa, in awarding an acknowledgement prize to the Ezbet Eshaq Eco Classroom in Egypt, had this to say. The jury recognized the project's ingenious approach of achieving both aesthetics and environmental responsibility by minimizing CO2 emissions through the use of recycled materials. The jury also applauded the project's attention to economic sustainability and financial viability. The architecture is simple and remarkably low cost, yet it efficiently fulfills a specific need and serves a particular role within the community. Richard, the jury for North America, in awarding you the Acknowledgement Prize to the Muscowpetung Powwow Arbour in Canada, had this to say. The jury panel applauded the design of this building, which serves as a significant place of celebration for the Muscowpetung culture in Canada. The project's emphasis on craft structures holds great relevance and resonates deeply with the indigenous community, honoring their traditions and cultural heritage. The project's aesthetics reflect a refined and sophisticated approach, showcasing a visually appealing structure. Before we start the conversation in earnest, please, could you each walk me through your respective project? Let's start with you, Aya.
Okay, thank you. So the Eco Classroom is a practical experiment of building using upcycled solid waste, together with the local community and children, to create impact as an alternative solution for solid waste buildup and lack of educational facilities. It's located in Ezbet, Eshaq in Fayoum, Egypt. It's a small agricultural village with less than 1,100 inhabitants. 250 of those are young children who must walk around 4 kilometers daily on poorly conditioned roads to get to the nearest school. The project sets an affordable, context-aware, and environmentally conscious example for providing safe education for rural children. We started with design workshops with parents and children and extended to training local youth on appropriate building techniques. The project was built out of more than 9,000 reused plastic bottles filled with sand. Locally sourced compressed earth blocks were also used in the construction, local bamboo as a roof, and natural clay for the plastering of walls and flooring. Upcycled wooden pallets were used to make desks and benches for the classroom furniture. Old tires and scrap steel and wood were used to construct a small playground. And lastly, a wastewater treatment and reuse unit employing nature-based solutions was installed to recycle wastewater for landscaping. Introducing such alternative materials and techniques shifted the community's perspective and raised their awareness on the impacts of the built environment on their health and the planet. They even requested that such techniques be used in their homes. In the Egyptian countryside's heritage, building with soil was always present, with some adobe buildings still standing nearby the site. However, the locals abandoned these practices, and the project focused on reviving that culture by reintroducing local version and waste materials with fresh aesthetics, while leveraging their environmental potential and ensuring community engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aya. Your turn, Richard. Would you summarize your project, please?
Yes, thank you, Nirmal. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that this project was done in partnership with Oxbow Architecture and their lead architect there, Brad Picard. The Muscowpetung community is in the Plains region of Canada, central western area, a sort of bison hunting culture traditionally. The powwow is an important summer festival. It's a place where cultures come together for the renewal of treaties, the exchange of songs, and dancing. And it usually goes on for a number of days. It's also a place of trade. So it's an important economic activity for that particular community. Now, the circle is as in many cultures, is a sacred geometry in traditional indigenous cultures across Canada. In this case, we made a structure that only can exist as a circle. In other words, it relies on the circular geometry for its structural integrity and the tensioning of the cables. We used local trees harvested by indigenous harvesters. Those trees are used in the round so that we don't compromise their structure by sawing them in any way. And then the cable structure is a sort of uses a steel to the greatest advantage for the least amount of weight. The tripods that support the ring of the structure are a direct reference to teepee forms, which begin first as a tripod and then are developed into a conical form, the most efficient structural shape for withstanding both gravity and the high winds that are there. The roof itself protects from the hot summer sun in that region and also from summer rainstorms. So it provides a kind of continuity against the weather. There's also a strong reference to a ceremony, a traditional ceremony that I became aware of during the design of that, where the participants in the ceremony stand in a circle with drawn bows, pointing arrows straight to the sky, and that became a strong, let's say, not only a visual image, but a kind of structural image of the tension of the bowstring holding the shaft. And that's essentially how this structure works. And then all the forces are contained by the fact that it's in a circle as well. So that's kind of a summary of how that took shape.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks very much. Now, my first impression of your two projects was just how radically different they appear. And certainly, in terms of climate and context, construction and form, they could not be further apart, right? There is, however, an underlying ambition that unites them, and this is that the very act of building seeks to transform the communities that they serve. Now, every building, of course, is designed to benefit its users, but the term hyperlocal takes it a step further. So let's unpack this. Yeah? What does your project offer the community that it is built for? I mean, apart from giving them an amenity, a classroom, or a cultural center, what else do they gain? Start with you, Aya.
Okay, so for us, hyperlocal design is an approach that prioritizes the needs, the specific needs and resources and cultural context of the local community. And it's important because it ensures that the final project, no matter how simple it is truly tailored and owned by the community rather than imposing an external one-size-fits-all solution. So to develop, it starts early on, when we develop the project brief. So we engaged the community in extensive participatory workshops and needs assessments with the children and parents and other community members in the Ezbet. It allows us to deeply understand the local challenges and aspirations, available resources. And this results in adding elements that enrich the original design idea and program. So for the people, for the children, these workshops, they resulted in that we added outdoor learning spaces for resilient education through pandemics instead of 2 classrooms. So one of them was like an outdoor space, learning space, a community gathering area, an upside playground for the village children because they didn't have any facilities, other facilities in the village. And in order to construct the classroom, we mapped the community's skills and knowledge and resources by conducting hands-on training sessions, and we really built relationships with the local community. It allows us to leverage the existing capabilities and empower the communities to be active participants in the design and the construction projects and in changing their lives, basically.
I read in the report of the project a very interesting note that the construction process was labor intensive. Yeah. And you've argued that making it labor intensive allows for a better distribution of capital. In other words, instead of putting the money in the hands of a few suppliers or a contractor, you were able to hire more people. So in a funny sort of way, the complexity of the construction created opportunities for more people to be involved and to make a living. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. Because especially in rural areas in Egypt, you do not have many employment opportunities for the local youth. And this results in them often migrating to cities and and creating more pressure on the city infrastructure. So we believe that in order for us to truly help make a difference in rural areas and in the city, it's very important to address the needs of the local youth to be able to find employment. So training them on constructing this classroom, it not only helps distribute income more fairly rather than, like bringing in a contractor from the city to just construct it in a couple of weeks or a month maybe, but it further helps in the development of the rural communities. And of course, one classroom won't make a big difference, but it's the approach that we really need to start considering.
Right. Richard, you spoke of the project in a largely symbolic way that it has these representational qualities of culture and identity. Can you walk me through this? I mean, what did the making of this project impart to the community? I mean, obviously the end product, the building, represents indigenous knowledge and culture, but what did the making of the building offer them?
Yeah. First of all, in terms of symbol, they're also very, let's say, empirically scientific principles involved, and that's maybe characteristic of how colonials would perceive indigenous culture. We often see it in symbolic forms, but a lot of what they did was for very good empirical reasons, because survival is, obviously have been there for thousands of years in a landscape that is can be very harsh, both in terms of heat and then cold in the winter. So I always see the forms and that were generated by that culture in terms of how they functioned. And so when I say they're symbolic, they're references to what was done in the past, but they were done for very, grounded reasons. The other thing that was important in the making of this was to deal with the perception of indigenous cultures, particularly in Canada, as being anachronistic. In other words, they're cultures of the past. And of course, they're very much alive and moving forward. And so are the ideas that came from that culture, and they're increasingly important to how the country as a whole perceives itself, that we understand how people survived in this place, in this landscape, and how they did it in material terms, and how it became an expression of who they were. And so I think there's an aspect of that too in the fact that these cultures weren't, generally speaking, fortress building cultures. The Europeans who came here came from a tradition of fortified cities. The cultures here existed because of treaty relationships and cultural relationships. And so the powwow is not just a monocultural thing, but it was a place of unifying cultures, and it's a place of renewal of treaties every year. And that becomes an important principle for how we perceive ourselves as a larger country going forward, and also brings indigenous thinking to the forefront of how we might move into the future.
That's fascinating what you said at the beginning, Richard, that, we tend to go to this dichotomy, this binary of symbolic and functional, but indigenous cultures in North America, they are one and the same. Could you give me an example of something symbolic that has functional value?
Yeah.
You spoke of the arrows shot into the sky, but are there examples that specifically deal with this?
Well, maybe a quick one, and it relates particularly to this project, is the use of round trees as they come to us. So I remember speaking to an indigenous elder, and he told me that, sawing a tree along its length was a very, it's a symbolically harsh thing to do, because you're in some ways destroying the integrity of that tree. But just in functional terms, a round tree comes to you as bundled fibers in concentric circles that go end to end. So in a way, you couldn't make a more efficient cellulose structure in a factory. And so then why would you cut it with a saw? Rather, you should look for the size of tree that you require and use that tree in the round. And so, that's what we've done in the structure. And you could say, well, that's symbolic because it honors the tree as it is, but it's a very scientific principle that leads us to doing that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Both of you, in your reports, in the project summaries, talked about community engagement. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, who did you engage with, and what was expected of them? Aya?
So our most important stakeholders here was the children and their parents, as well as other community members. We tried as much as possible to deeply involve them throughout the process, throughout the starting, like I said, from the brief to the design and the needs assessments. We made it very purposeful that they felt that this particular classroom was theirs. They designed it, they built it, they owned it, and it is for their own benefit. This high level of ownership and buy-in for the community was essential to achieve. And as an NGO with a mission to achieve participatory, sustainable rural development, we find it very important to engage the local community, and also to manage the communication, because this is often something that you would find that communication between professionals and their ideas, architects with their big words and big ideas, and the local communities' needs. This type of harmony is often challenging to achieve, but we try to make it work, and through utilizing like visual aids and hands-on demonstrations throughout the project, collaborative and iterative approaches that also has to value the local knowledge. And this is, I think, a very key component in the formula.
Give me an example of something that emerged from these workshops that may not have occurred to the architect. I'm curious, you talked about children being involved in formulating needs. What did they say to you? Yeah. What did they give you that became instrumental in the design process?
The children, they want to play and they want to have fun. And that to them was a very important aspect that they were missing in all of their schools. So this particular component and trying to integrate it with the learning experience, so it helped us shape their outdoor learning spaces and the playing areas through which so basically we created interactive playing areas and games that could help them count better and recognize letters by just through playing. And of course, the climbing wall. The climbing wall was, I don't know if it showed somewhere in the process. So children in Egypt, they have a habit of climbing over school walls and escaping. So the climbing wall was symbolic that the children actually wanted to go to the classroom, climb the wall to the classroom, rather than escape from the classroom. So it's these little things, and just working with the children and seeing their enthusiasm was priceless.
Nice. Richard, I'm intrigued by stakeholder involvement in your project, only because on the surface it looks very sophisticated, with the tensile structures, and the whole building seems to be in tension. It's held in place by cables. But at the same time, you were dealing with indigenous methods and technologies and materials. How do the two things come together? I mean, was that a comfortable fit? Did you have to be the arbitrator? I mean, talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, the working out of, first of all, the procurement process and so on. we're trying to source things as much as we can locally. So the wood, for example, doesn't come from glue lamp factories and so on. It's straight from the forest, debarked and then used on site. And again, we tried to source indigenous woodcutter, companies, forestry management companies. We have the same issues in a way that they do in Egypt. There's a high unemployment rate, and a lot of youth going to the cities to find employment. So we had to think of how do we build this thing with as much local involvement as possible. Things like, in this culture, the making of tripod, the use of the tripod in the conical form is almost now universally understood. They're about as efficient a structure as you can make against windstorms and all the elements that you have there. So there's a familiarity with, let's say the tripod, rather than supporting the outer ring with columns, let's say, there are tripod elements that are immediately understood. They're visually, someone could understand the links between that structure, which you could say is forward-looking with an historical understanding of structures, including even the tensile element. So all of those things, while not being in their finished form familiar, the elements of it would be familiar to someone from that culture, and they would make those connections. And especially for the young generation, and there's a very large, population under 25 within that culture, they would understand that those old ideas have legs. They're moving forward. That they come from a solid source, if you like, and so all of that thinking went into it. I mean, there were. The budget was, of course, very important. There's a limited, let's say there's limited resource. And so again, we have to source things as locally as possible. When we use steel, it has to be used very efficiently and very sparingly. It's in an agricultural region. So let's say the steel connectors that connect the cables to the poles, those could be fabricated by people who are used to fabricating agricultural equipment, and all of those kinds of things are part of the thinking. And then Brad Picard, my partner in this, he had regular meetings with the community, and physical models were important to communicating the ideas. Using a physical model, you can show how it works, how it will go together. And I think maybe Aya's experience too, that people can immediately relate to a physical model in a way that you can't say with a computer rendering for a different kind of client, let's say.
Right.
So the physicality of it was important, yeah.
Right. No, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at these meetings, because I've had to manage workshops and charrettes in the over time, and they are at best very contentious to begin with, and there's a lot of disagreement. Eventually, you get to an alignment, and I'm wondering, in these processes, what were the big tension points? I mean, were there significant disagreements that you had to somehow mediate on, Aya?
Well, because the program was quite simple, we did not have any major disagreements there. But in the beginning, there was resistance to the idea of building the way we're building. I mean, it was like, why not just get in a concrete mixing thing and some bricks and just get it done with? But as the process started and they started understanding, and especially as being engaged in the process and seeing the end result and how different it was from what they're usually used to, and also the comfort levels in the classroom without having to use air conditioning, like the use of like the thick walls and the natural ventilation techniques. All of these it helped shift their perspectives. They understanding something, like, or expecting that the community would accept something that they haven't been exposed to before with the upcycled materials, and something that they're trying to move away from, such as, like building with mud and clay, as because they see that they look at people in the cities, and it's like, this is how new things or modern construction should be done. So it's navigating through these social stigmas, and it takes time and it takes effort.
That's a really interesting point. And I wonder if, you have to fight the battle of the obvious, right? Which is to say, well, everybody else is doing this. Why are you making life difficult? And then you have to explain to them. How did you explain to them why you were making their life difficult?
Awareness plays a very important part in the process. So most people in these communities have never heard of the term climate change before, but they feel its presence. So it's important for us to help explain to them the phenomena that they're living through, and taking them through why it's happening, and emphasizing the importance of their role on the local level in changing it, and how doing it this way will make these impacts less intensive on them. So it's all about awareness and connection, and for them to understand that you're truly there to make a difference. It's not just another classroom.
Right. Richard, I wonder if you had that similar problem of pushback. I think that the timber tensile structure is incredibly beautiful, but I can imagine someone on the ground saying, why aren't we just using fabric as a, the allegory to TP architecture, wouldn't that have been a simpler choice? Again, the obvious and the simple, but did you have to deal with pushback on any front?
Yes, definitely. Well, I could say the fabric one, the fabric was actually too expensive. I mean, the kind of fabrics that we would need for that scale. So, of course, as an IS case, the budget is a huge factor.
Right.
And so then, what we're proposing isn't typically built in that area. So, well, we could build something out of, let's say steel structure or big glulam beams, although it's much less efficient and maybe less expressive. They say, well, we know what that is. We're used to it. And so now we have to very carefully manage the budget and say, well, can we meet the budget? And also the community, of course, was very ambitious for the size of the space, because we're also looking for multiple uses in that space. So we're looking at it for, let's say, it's an equestrian culture too. So it could be a place where equestrian events could be held, or training of horses or training of riders. All of that could happen. And so we're always trying to get the scale where it would have multiple uses, but at the same time control the cost. And so in the end, it was interesting that the community, you don't necessarily understand the scale just looking at dimensions on a drawing, but then someone would say, well, how big is that compared to an ice hockey rink, because we've had a powwow in an ice hockey rink, and so the ice hockey rink became the unit of measure. And but yeah, certainly there were, you could say in the end they're all around the budget, but it involves everything else as well.
Right. I'm curious, how do you assess success in a project like this? How do you define it, and then how do you measure it at the end of the project? Muscowpetung is not complete yet, am I right, Richard? It's in progress?
That's right, it's in progress, yeah.
Okay, so we'll come to Aya first. How that project is built. How do you know that you've been successful? What is the measure of success?
Success in such a project is often defined by a combination of quantitative and qualitative measures. So quantitatively, it's assessed by factors such as CO2 emissions, the number of plastic waste diverted from landfills, and the how many metric tons of concrete waste that we have employed in the foundations of the buildings. Such such metrics, and also so like we said, we have other factors such as improved access to education. So how many children were able to access education who were skipping school, and how much cost savings did we make by using this technique. So these are quantitative. Qualitatively, though, it's also we measure the levels of, we try to assess levels of community empowerment, improved awareness of sustainable practices, and the overall project's abilities to inspire similar initiatives within the local community and also in the broader context of the region. So we have actually engaged in pre and post surveys with the communities and assessing their satisfaction, and at the end of the day, just making sure that the children are happy and getting a good education.
That's an interesting point you make about the replicability of the approach, because that was one of your ambitions, was it not? That, if this is successful, that you would see imitators or others in Egypt or elsewhere tapping into the same idea, the same logic. Has that happened? Are you aware of any that have done so?
Okay, so we've actually been contacted by several individuals and groups who wish to replicate this, and also several donor organizations who have seen the project on their radar, especially after the award. So we have to thank you guys for that. So there are some discussions, but because this is relevantly new, so still nothing on concrete on the table, but the momentum is definitely there.
Great. Richard, I know the project is in progress, but what would be the metrics of success for your project?
Well, that's a complex question, maybe. First of all, its environmental impact, of course, is important. The fact that we've been able to build a structure of that, let's say, scale and so on, in a relatively remote region, using local, as much as possible, sourcing local materials, local labor. The metric of success would be to see it in action, contributing to the cultural and economic life of that community, and particularly the younger generation, and they would see a kind of, just the joy of their culture and celebrate it, and also see how their ideas within that culture have a road forward. So I think partly it's having buildings like this enter into a wider discourse of what the contribution is of indigenous awareness, about the environment, about how we treat the environment, but then even in just sort of purely practical terms, how we deal with issues of climate, structure, all of those things, which they definitely. I mean, there are ideas there that we learn from and can learn from going into the future. So I think that, as in the building in Egypt that I was talking about, the building has a wider life than just that place and that time. It's part of a larger discourse and a larger awareness of, especially the younger generation, of the strategies we need to take forward for all kinds of reasons, including global warming, climate change, all of those things that we're facing. But and a lot of those, let's say that awareness is particularly still strong within indigenous cultures, and we need to learn from them.
Mm. I mean, one of the things you talked about in the submission was that this project was really about creating a celebratory space for this community, for creating a new way of understanding them, for a new way of them seeing themselves. How will, I mean, I'm curious as to how we know when, whether qualitative or quantitatively, how will we know when these things are attained? What is the measure? What is the way of knowing?
First of all, Holcim has an important role to play in that. I mean, obviously, you know, the fact that our two projects have been chosen by such a distinguished jury is a huge, let's say, boost for not only us as designers but for those communities. And I just want to, you know, say thank you for that. Not just the honor that it brings to us as architects, but those little communities. Believe me, it's a huge event for them, and so and the fact that you've become known for supporting that kind of work is incredibly important in the whole scheme of things worldwide. You know, that a small community in Egypt, or in my case in, you know, Saskatchewan, is on the world map for something that they are doing and achieving. So that's important. Of course, the community itself, and in the community again, I point to both the young people, you know, if they embrace it, if they want to be there, and then also the elders, the kind of cultural elders of the community. If they, you know, they will give you honest feedback, and they will tell you, you know, when you hit the mark and where you haven't.
Well, I look forward to visiting both projects, but and yours when it's completed. They're both amazing work. I am going to turn the table over to our audience and see what's coming at us. So I'll read a couple of questions out. How, I'm assuming this goes to Aya. How can we encourage community to participate in adobe construction, especially when people are moving from adobe to concrete construction? I think you touched on that a little bit, but perhaps you'd like to elaborate on this. I think it's a really interesting question because you know, in the podcast that I do, I've had these conversations with various guests from Mexico City and India and so on. And very often the feedback is not just that concrete represents a more modern option to mud or bamboo or brick, but that it represents a more durable option, you know, and durability is prized in many of these communities. So I'm wondering how you know, to elaborate on this question from Kamlesh Ganchi, how you sell the idea of these materials in terms of cost and so on, but also in terms of durability.
First of all, the angle there to highlight is always the cost, because if we're talking about remote rural communities, they are already struggling to most of the time to make the ends meet. We're talking about people often at the bottom of the income pyramid. So the cost approach is very important to highlight. So that is one thing. The second is awareness on the impact on the environment and on their lives. This is also very important to highlight. So I think these are always the main two factors. These are the main two selling points, and a very effective strategy is to show them visually other success examples. So so in Fayoum, for example, we have another village where we have previously worked called Tunis Village. This village is now famous for its architecture, the traditional mud architecture, and it's actually it's become a hub for arts cultures with a lot of tourism happening. So showing them examples of how staying true to their heritage can benefit them in many ways, both economically and to the environment.
Right. You know, I read somewhere that in Bali, they continue to build with thatched roofs in spite of the impermanence of the material, because it keeps an entire community of craftsmen at work. You know, the impermanence of something actually creates a longevity of the craft, where if they were to build the same with concrete or tiles, a lot of these people would go out of work very quickly.
Oh, on the durability angle, also, it's very important to help them understand that building with earth has also become a science. There has been a lot of development and research that we and a lot of international organizations have been engaged in to improve the durability of the materials and the aesthetics of the materials and the finesse of it. So it's very important that they understand that it's also more than what they used to have. That it's been a long way from there.
It's come a long way.
Yeah.
Samantha Ruth has an interesting question, and I think this could well address to both of you. Projects like these at a small scale are usually found in small towns or rural contexts. What role can such projects play in shaping bigger cities? Richard, thoughts?
I'm not sure what I can say about that, other than that, in my experience, any big city, any successful big city, or one that I enjoy living in or being in, is really a collection of villages. So, you know, when we think city, I mean, I've lived in a few cities in my life, and again, the ones that I really remember fondly or want to go back to are the ones where essentially I lived in a village that was surrounded by a lot of villages. I mean, so, you know, when it comes right down to it, it's still people who live in those places, and it's at the scale of, you know, what happens at a bus stop or a tram stop or you know, that makes me feel at home in that city, or it's where I meet not a group of, let's say, 60,000 people, but where I'm with 100 people or with 10 people, or, you know, and those are elements of the city, they're elements of the village. And again, I just always come back to that a successful city is, I mean, really the living unit of it is your dwelling unit, and then the village of which you're a part within that city.
We have surrendered craft in cities, haven't we? We tend to see everything as a mass-produced object. And, you know, to your point about bus stops and tram stops, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if they were built with timber and tensile structures in the spirit of your project? Why not? You know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Aya, what lessons does your project offer big cities?
Well, when it comes to waste, big cities are the go-to areas. So I think while we believe in hyperlocal design, as you have mentioned, there is no one size fits all, but the mindset needs to be there of let's try to see what we can do with local materials and local waste. And the city is no different. There are tons of waste that can be used, but it's just about finding the appropriate context specific ways to use it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Antoine Dada, I think he asked a question of Richard. How was the initial fire risk management addressed in your beautiful project? Was there a risk that it would all burn down?
There's definitely a lot of, fire regs come into play in a structure like this, or any assemblage structure, and the fact that we're using wood. So one is the exit routes. I mean, it sort of falls into, again, within indigenous culture, the four directions are sacred. They're sacred directions. So, we automatically have four. When you have a circle, you have four routes into the circle that correspond to the four sacred directions. So the fire exiting is important. The timber rating on the wood is important as well. So that all comes into play. But definitely it conforms to all the codes, and fire is a relevant part of it. Timber has to be of a certain dimension, and then also whether or not it's in a location where it's going to catch fire or not. So we look at all of those things.
Right.
But it's not so as designed, it's not an issue.
Right. Last question, and this is the final question I ask of all guests on the webinar. If there was one thing you could have done differently, what would that be? Aya?
That's a nice question. So I'm actually not able to answer that question.
It's okay to
currently.
say there's nothing you would have done differently. It's fine as well.
Because there must be something that could have been done differently. But I'm unfortunately unable to think of one right now.
Richard?
Well, I maybe have a similar response to Aya. I mean, if there was something I could have done differently, I would have done it. But and because we're kind of in the procurement stage now, constructing it, maybe I can tell you in a couple of months or so. Yeah. I mean, I'm not. There was actually a lot of, going back to the fire issue. There was a lot of time went into meeting codes, where the code, there are a lot of blank spots in the code, let's say, that require testing, full scale testing, which is very expensive. Even in the case of structures, we're proposing round trees. Well, strangely enough, our codes here don't deal with round trees. They deal with either sawn wood or glulam, and industrialized wood, you would call it. So, but that doesn't mean I would change, from using round wood. I think it needs to be put in the codes for its proper strength, which by all testing accounts is 3 to 4 times as strong as its sawn wood equivalent, but yet the code devalues it. So I regret that we had to. I mean, it meant a lot of time, but it was time well spent, let's say. But there are things like that where I think, well, our codes and even our engineering practices need to catch up with what people did traditionally in many cases, and what they knew either intuitively or empirically from how they did things.
Right.
And
No, I asked Aya this. I mean, what has been the replicability factor of her project? How has it affected other projects down the line? And Richard, maybe you'd like to say something about that, because has this project brought to light the deficiencies of the code? Is that something that's under discussion?
Well, it's under discussion by me and our team. We're trying to bring it to a wider discussion. But yeah, definitely the issue, for example, on roundwood, because using trees straight as they come from the forest, you can, I think intuitively all understand that would be stronger than one that was cut through a saw lengthways, because where the fibers are now, let's say, almost randomly distributed. So you put them into a hydraulic jig in an engineering lab, the tree will outperform the sawn wood every time, but our code says the reverse.
Right.
That the sawn wood will outperform the tree. And that's that's not even based on testing. That's just assumptions built into the code. So that's incredibly unscientific. And so, it's my mission and the mission of certain members of the team to change that. But it's surprisingly involved and expensive, because you got to, most of the labs are set up for the benefit of industry. They're not set up for the benefit of a small indigenous community, or I mean, we have small communities throughout Canada living in forests where they have to import engineered houses from outside because the codes don't acknowledge that they can build with the trees there. I mean, this is a huge issue, but I mean, it's for another discussion maybe. But I'm certainly taking it forward. Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have, guys. Thank you for your time and your generosity for sharing with us. It's been a great pleasure. At this point, I'd like to invite Priya back to the stage for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much for allowing us a great sneak peek into your projects, bit more detailed than what we know and what we read on our website. So understanding your personal views and your struggles and your challenges with the projects, I think our audience really appreciated it. I do not claim to make a summary of what has just been said, because that will take far more time. However, I would like to bring a point for our audience to bring back with them at the end of this webinar, is the need that both of you highlighted, Aya and Richard, was the importance of awareness and education for these smaller communities. They might not understand what climate change is in an academic definition, but they are feeling the impact of it, and making them understand what changes they can bring to their lifestyles, to their everyday ongoings. So that, I think, the architectural interventions have managed to bring forth for people to understand. So here, that's something that our audience can bring with them, and begin their own hyperlocal projects. So I thank you all for this wonderful talk. Before I leave, for our audience, our next webinar is on August the 2nd, and that will feature our bronze and gold winner from the Latin American region, and the webinar will be in Spanish. So we encourage all of our Spanish speaking audience to join us, and do not forget to bring a friend along. Thank you very much, and see you all next time. Bye.
Bye, Priya.
Thank you.
Bye.